from breakthrough strategies to game-changing innovations and cultural shifts. You'll discover the lessons that drive real impact, and we'll dive into the moments that changed everything. Welcome to The Missing Piece with April Reed. All right. Well, today we are joined by a dynamic leader to the world of IT strategy and business transformation, Wayne Gillis. With a proven track record of unifying technology and business goals, Wayne has led enterprise-wide transformations, built high-performing teams, delivered millions in operational savings through smart innovation. His leadership style blends strategic vision with people-focused execution, creating culture of collaboration and growth. We're excited to dive into his journey and explore the insights he's gained along the way. Wayne, welcome to the Missing Piece show. We're happy to have you.
Thank you, April. I'm thrilled to be here today.
I really enjoyed looking through your profile on LinkedIn. It's extremely impressive. I see you've come from the clinical side, now in the leadership execution side of healthcare. Would you just introduce yourself? How did you get started? What brought you to healthcare? And now even just a little bit of your role that you're in. I'm excited to get to know you. And so for our audience that are sitting in your seat or either on the clinical side, leadership side, they can be inspired not only by your story, but the things that you've done to innovate and disrupt the space as well. So introduce us. Who is Wayne Gillis?
Well, April, thrilled to be here today. Absolutely thrilled. Love talking about healthcare. I'm massively passionate about it. And I think there's so many opportunities and there's so many ways we can do things differently. And so, back to disrupting, as you talked about, I think that's part of our role as leaders, that we need to disrupt the space if it's not meeting the needs of the community, the organization, or nationally. And I think we have many examples of that. For me, getting into it, I am a nurse. Was my first, introduction into healthcare, but I kind of fell into it because of my wife. So I'd never planned on becoming a nurse. And so she wanted to do that. She had a healthcare family. And so, I did not. And so I kind of got introduced and then I was like, well, maybe I could make a difference in this. And maybe I love people, loved the thought of that. So went into nursing school, loved being a nurse. I was an open heart ICU nurse for a number of years. And then I guess people saw leadership skills in me. And, I was in the same organization in Florida for about 17 years. And I had a great mentor who was absolutely wonderful, still is a great mentor today. As she moved up, I moved up. And so I kind of followed her, over that 17 years and ended up in an associate vice president role. But one of the things that I think I learned along the way and then continued to learn was, as I was moving into leadership and trying to figure out how I can impact the staff to support them, right? Because I wasn't a bedside nurse anymore. I was directly interfacing with patients and families, right? And meeting their needs. I needed to shift to be able to figure out how do I get the right tools and the right education and the right support, right, to my team. And then how do I engage them in a different way? And honestly, during that 17 years, I didn't figure that out. I didn't figure that out until later on how we could have done things differently. But, as I moved and got my first VP role in actual Dallas or just outside of Dallas, I met a CEO there who hired me, and he was my second mentor that I still have today. And he saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. I kind of wanted to be a COO, and that was going to be kind of my top, right? And that's where I thought that would be it. And I was thrilled to try to aspire for that. But he saw me that I needed to, he felt like I had skills that should be a CEO, and I had the ability to influence, and he felt like I could make a big difference. And so it took me a number of years, because as I continued I worked under him for about 4 or 5 years. And then I became an interim CEO at the hospital when he transitioned off. And big learning. That was probably a pivotal point for me to recognize that I was very good clinically. I understood clinical. I could speak to physicians. We could have great clinical, dialogue, and I could absolutely interact with them and could gain their trust, etc. But from the corporate operational side, you know, how they thought, how they kind of went at healthcare, how they wanted things from a result standpoint, bigger strategy picture. I hadn't been exposed to that at that level in that role, and I wasn't ready for it. And so I'm glad I had the sense, the common sense to recognize I needed to pivot and back up. And so I actually, spent some time. It was probably another 5 years before I ever got my position of CEO at Great Falls. And I did that on purpose because I wanted to widen my aperture, that I could see things in a much global, much larger viewpoint and perspective. Clinically, I was strong, but the back end of the hospital, when we think about
Yeah.
IT, when we think about facilities, right? When we think about some of those absolute functions that we need and have to have in order for us to continue to do well, I didn't have that experience yet. And so that's ended up where I got the opportunity to go into IT and really learned a whole different perspective of how do we look at healthcare and how does from a service standpoint, right? Because IT is a service to the organization, very different than the clinical perspective that's kind of right on the front lines. That really changed my perspective of really what some of these support departments and how pivotal they are, and how we need to partner with them in a very different way than how we had been doing in the past. And so you now fast forward to me going to Great Falls. One of my biggest issues was IT. They had just done, what's the chance, right? They had just done an implementation and it didn't go well. And so here I am in the CEO role, first time being a CEO, and it was a space I could actually facilitate conversations and connect people with and make sure we have the right teams to problem solve. I wasn't doing the work, but I was just making sure that I facilitated the right people and we made a big impact quickly. If I hadn't had that aperture to be able to look wide, I would have been very, very, very inept at having the ability to be able to help bring us to the right resolution. And now you fast forward to the current role I'm in here in a Gallup, and totally different environment. We were thinking about closing the hospital about 18 months ago. And
Wow.
so, which was a massive, Montana and New Mexico are very similar. They're very rural. There's a lot of distance between hospitals. And so people need these rural hospitals. It's vital for the community. There are some diagnoses, right, that you can drive 2 hours for. There are some that's not the case,
Yeah.
cardiac being one of them. Right. You need to have a local place that you can go and get good, adequate care. And then if we can't fix it, right, we need to get them to a tertiary care facility, and we need to do that efficiently and effectively. And we were in a place where we were thinking about closing. It was before I got here, but I came into that. I came into $17 million worth of debt. I came in November. And so in December, we finished the year. We had a $7 million loss. So we weren't making money. We were losing money. On top of, we had this massive debt. And so there were a lot of levers that needed to be pulled in order for us to, one, continue to move in a positive direction, right, to help us where we can be sustainable. So I feel like my mission here is, I need to set the place up, and I need to be in a position to where we've got decades of viable, healthy, hospital services that they can provide to this community so it can be here for a long time, right, to support. In order for us to do that, we actually have to be able to have enough revenue to expenses, right? We have to be able to pay those things. So in April, we finished paying off the 17 million. So we have no debt. That's done. And we're a couple $1 million ahead of budget for this year. And so it's a complete turnaround. The fastest one I've ever had, to be honest with you. I like to fix things. And so that has been always something that I've found it's interested me. And I like the challenge of pulling the pieces together. But this is definitely the fastest one. And there was no silver bullet at all. It was solely about all the little things and putting yourself close enough to the problem that you can help people see it and help them figure out the solution, and you be the enabler that, pulls things out of the way from challenges or barriers, figure out the right solutions, or is it, a piece of equipment? The majority of the time it's process, and it's
Right.
really just really retooling those things, but you have to get people close enough to it so they can see where the opportunities and the gaps are, the missing pieces, and how they're not connecting across the organization. Our biggest challenge here was we had a lot of fractures in the process across the organization. And those fractures were causing us to lose money, not get bills out the door, you know, miss opportunities for charging, right? It was just all over the place pretty globally. And so now we're still have a long way to go, but we're in a position where, we are it's positive, right? And we're starting to have the ability to reinvest in ourselves, get capital that we need. We're in a place where our credit is getting better, right? Because that was honestly a big issue when I arrived. I couldn't get vendors, right? Because they pulled my credit. And as a hospital, we weren't paying people. Obviously, we had $17 million worth of debt. And so we
Wow.
have to replace all that stuff, right? It's a journey for us. I feel like that a lot of times, the traditional CEO has, typically comes up through the ranks in a certain path. There are lots of different paths, but I think that in a well-oiled machine, in a hospital that has probably a lot of things in place, a lot of people could be successful. I think it's very limited, the amount of people that could be successful to come into this situation, because you have to be really wide. You
Yeah.
have to get into all the spaces. I mean, I've been in the OR watching OR procedures. I've sat beside, in the revenue cycle piece and the billing, so I could watch and understand and just talk to my team, right? To get and see things. You have to do that in a small organization that's got this many holes. So
Yeah.
you can at least start to figure out what's the big picture and how are some of the big puzzle pieces, right? That I can start to put together to bring the team along for the smaller puzzle pieces, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, there's so many amazing things that you just said that I think is extremely inspiring, as well as, just having the wisdom to know how to take something from here to here. One of the things I wanted to call out and just talk about is in those 17 years, you said, I didn't get that experience. I can't just all of a sudden become a CEO. And so coming from, and then being humble in that to where you're like, I wasn't seasoned enough. I didn't have enough experience. So what did I do to get it? And you said you had
Yeah.
2 mentors specifically. I think that's a huge call out. Having mentors that will pour into you, or just asking somebody to mentor you, and then seeking out the knowledge on what do I need to learn. I found it interesting that the next thing you know, you're sitting in that CIO seat,
Correct.
as the chief information officer,
Right.
saying, okay, hold on. And who knew that you were on the trajectory to be the CEO several times? But without your clinical understanding and then that information technology understanding, you probably wouldn't have had these turnarounds had you not, taken that. So, looking at that, when you said that 17 years of not having that experience, like now sitting in the seat of CEO, what are some of the things that you are doing or would encourage people on how to learn, how to, I don't want to call it climb the corporate ladder, but how to strategically move up and grow currently so that it doesn't take them 17 years or more?
Yeah.
What advice would you give them?
I think one of the things that probably could have positioned me better, to be honest with you, I went the MBA route. And I think when you go the MHA route, there's some significant advantages to it. One of the
Yeah.
biggest things is really that you end up with most programs, not 100%, have this executive rotation kind of your last, semester. Sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it's only 3 months. And so it puts you in a hospital working with executives, right?
Yeah.
And so typically, if you're good and you're ambitious, you end up coming out of that with a director, kind of position at least, and they tend to move up quickly.
Yeah.
I think there's pros and cons to that. I think, and either way you slice it, you have to be willing to look in the mirror and say, and be honest with yourself and say, okay, can I, can I lead this? Do I have enough, basic knowledge that I can at least see when something is failing or is off, and then have the knowledge to understand who do I need to pull in, right? Because you shouldn't ever, right? It's why you have a team. You lean on people that are, you want to hire people smarter than you. That's, one of my
Mhm.
mentors, that was a thing that's never left me. It's not about ego. And sometimes
Yep.
people can have ego and that gets in the way, but you want to make sure you surround yourself with people that have different experiences than you and be willing to be vulnerable. And so
Yeah.
I think if I was willing to be vulnerable, I wasn't in a position to be able to get some of those experiences. Honestly, as a CNO, which was my first kind of VP role, I got pigeonholed. And I think a lot of nurses do, to
Mm.
where you are seen as that clinical expert. You're not necessarily seeing that you have business acumen. And
Yeah.
so I had to prove myself. It took years to get people to see me, because I used to get this, oh, you can do math. Yes, I can do, outside of nurse math, I can do math. I've had 2 accounting classes. I understand, when we think about the balance sheet, I understand what that looks like. But honestly, it's, you get pigeonholed sometimes. And
Mm.
if somebody is wanting, I think the clinical experience is vital. I think it's a
Yep.
huge advantage. Not the only, many people can be successful without it, but that helps, I think, the nurse leader with the MHA kind of break out of that mold and can get
Yeah.
them exposure to the right people that can
Yep.
pour into them and actually
Mhm.
help them to advance their career in a much faster trajectory than I had.
I love that. I think that's extremely inspiring. So, I called the Missing Piece podcast because I believe that when we begin to identify the missing pieces, that's when we're able to unlock and, as you said, kind of bring that puzzle piece
Yeah.
together. For me, my career, the missing piece was training. So I'm old school. I go all the way back to 2004. I am implementing a thing called an electronic health record for the Department of Defense. And America was not using an EHR. The Department of Defense was maybe one or two. So here I am traveling all over the world to the military hospitals implementing this EHR. Well, what you learn quickly, as you know, is that doctors and nurses didn't go to school to use technology. They
You're
went to
right.
school to patients. So imagine back 20 plus years ago trying to teach a neurosurgeon that's been practicing for 30 years on paper to click.
Yep. They hated it.
That was my life. So that was my experience at a very young age. And I had to figure out how to get them to use this system and force them to use the
Right.
system. So I began to identify the missing pieces. And the missing piece was the fact that nobody took the time to understand their SOAP note, understand the way they charge, understand the way that they group things, or understand the way they see patients and the
Yep.
workflow in which they do it. So I began studying. To your point, Wayne, I began studying and watching and observing. And then I would go and I would manipulate the EHR or build out their SOAP notes according to what would almost look like, that. And I would say, can I just have 2 minutes of your time and I'll show you this is how easy it would be to order, whatever orders they need to put in, etc. So I began to identify what was broken so that if you begin to blend it, in your story, you were sharing about how, you sat in the rev cycle side, you've sat in the IT side. And I think it's what makes you, the CEO turnaround, that guy that you are, and being able to eliminate debt. So I wanted to talk a little bit about training. If you have, say, a rev cycle team that weren't trained properly, or you have physicians or clinical staff that weren't trained properly, you obviously end up with all these broken pieces. So, yeah, I wanted to see if you agreed with that statement and have
Mhm.
seen that to be true.
Yes.
And then what are you doing in your organization or have you done to train effectively? Obviously, you've done it because of the debt reduction, the wiping out 17 million, making it profitable, et cetera. What's the secret sauce there?
That's a great question. Actually, the training piece is one of the things that we found some gaps, not right off the beginning, honestly. I guess we've made some assumptions, and when you're looking at an organization that, healthcare is complicated, right? There's lots of pieces that connect together. But as we started kind of teasing it, and I'm a big believer of, we do daily huddles, but daily huddles need to be measurable. They need to be talking about real things that are happening in the organization because we are dealing with real people. And so it's about abnormality escalation, right? It's about seeing the abnormal so that you can address it. And so many times we'll look at data and it's 30 days or 45 days old, I can't fix any of that stuff that was 45 days ago. And I'm also not even starting to figure out what the new process needs to look like, right? Because I just recognized it. And so when we started looking at some of the workflows, we were looking at the big ticket items, which we needed to. It was, a prioritization on the back end revenue cycle and how can we fix some of the processes. And then some of them were manual intervention until we get the process redesigned. And so that is what helped us try to recoup the money the fastest. But now we're at a place where those things are starting to get into a good, stable state that now we've moved into all the clinical departments. And what we have found is that when we look at how we're training, and I'll do nurses, for instance, as a great example, there were certain things that were built in our EHR that if they follow a certain workflow, charges drop, all these things happen automatically. And if you
Right.
don't follow that workflow right, that doesn't happen. And so what kind of, again, we were looking at charges and how long it was taking us to capture them. And then we were still seeing gaps in that space. And so we started backing up, right? And we started all the way back to orientation and to look at how are we training these people? How much time are we giving? And there was a big need for us. We were training the IT portion was about 4 hours and we need 2.5 days. And so we wonder why we're having issues, right? It's because people don't know the workflows. And we also didn't have a consistent trainer. We did a piece of this, and then the rest of the orientation was going to happen on the floor. Well, if the trainer on the floor doesn't know the workflows, right? We're just perpetuating that, right? And so innocent, completely 100% innocent. And I find this happens a lot across, you talked about training, across, many hospitals that we've got to invest in the right stuff to set people up for success. And they also need to understand the why, right? In order for them to put the effort into it, especially on the provider side. The providers want to give excellent care. That's why they go into healthcare. And they know that the hospital has to get paid. But if they don't understand the why they have to do this, click or this, or follow this workflow, many times they're not going to do it. Right. But if you tell them the why, you take the time to show and understand so they understand the impact overall for the organization, it's a whole different conversation with them.
They do. They want to feel heard. I
Yep.
noticed along the way, we just threw technology at physicians
Yes, you're
and
right.
they weren't asked. It was like, well, I'm the one seeing the patients and you never asked me. But then when you begin to have that conversation and show them how it can improve population health, how it
Yep.
keeps everything compliant and legal, how it actually improves patient care. They can run the data and the statistics according how to treat
It's true.
diabetic 2 patients, get them off the medication, like, et cetera. Then they're like, okay, I can get on board with that.
Yes.
Just please stop throwing technology at me and expect me to use it and not properly train me. So I agree. The why and including them in that
Yes.
conversation made a huge impact. So, real quick, as we wrap up, I mean, I could talk to you forever. Healthcare is evolving quickly.
Yes.
And there's new technology. Now we have AI. We have all the things that's happening so quickly. As the CEO, as somebody who has sat in so many different seats, where do you see healthcare to be in 5 to 10 years? And what does that look like for you and your role and your organization and the future of healthcare in general? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, I'm excited about a lot of this stuff. I think it's still scary for a lot of people, honestly. And I think
Yeah.
it could be scary if we don't meter it and put the right technology with the right implementation, with, the right education and knowledge. I think that has to be rolled out very smartly and judiciously, and it needs to be very strategic. But I think there is huge benefits. I think we're finally at a place, honestly, where if we match the right technology with the EHR, right? Because they're all different. They have some similar things, but there's a lot of vast differences in a lot of the different EHR systems, even when we think about the two big leaders, Epic and Cerner. And if, as we match those things and add the right technology that is actually going to be an advancement for either the clinicians on the nursing side and the providers, I think we're finally getting to a place where it actually is going to make their jobs easier. But that has been a long time coming. Back to exactly what you were saying initially, it's been 20 years, right? We've been doing this for a long time, and we did not, we, meaning nationally, right? We did not pull in the right clinicians to build this stuff and make sure that as we're moving this forward, that it matches to actually help. One, we wanted the data, but the bigger thing is, how does it help facilitate patient care in the moment, right? Because that's when the care is happening. And so I think ambient listening, there's a lot of things that have grown over the last few years that are very sophisticated, that absolutely can capture conversations, and there can be very little editing. And that does save time to clinicians. And so I think we're getting there, and that's super exciting. So in 5 years, I think as we look and continue, not only are you going to have the documentation piece that's going to be a lot more automated, that will fit into order bursting. You say a keyword and it bursts a certain order set, etc. But the bigger thing, I think, is how we as humans are going to interact with the AI for us to bring awareness. And it ties back to abnormality escalation again. What I'm doing manually on boards in my huddle every day, we're going to have the AI searching across the record of the last 24 hours and bringing up the abnormal stuff to the provider for him to make a decision. Not make a decision for him or her, but bring it to. And so that, again, is a huge time saver, because they would have to scan the record, right, to accomplish that. So that's where I kind of see some of this going. So I think we're going to be quicker to head somebody decompensating much faster. I think pulling some of the subtle things that we are going to see across the medical record, that once you pull it together, paints a different picture than the individual lab result. I think a lot of those things are going to help us be able to drive better healthcare in the future. So I'm excited about that stuff.
I am too. I love everything that you just said. I am too, and of course, proceeding cautiously and being able to understand. But the more that you know, the more empowered and
Yes.
inspired you can be. And
Yep.
so it's really beginning to understand. I think, especially with AI right now, it's the fear of the unknown,
Yes.
and we don't know. So don't be fearful. Learn, investigate, and then leverage it to genuinely help. Not only your organization, but your patients at the end of the day,
Yes.
which is why we're here. I love that. I love everything that you said. I think that's fantastic. All right, one final question. Well, two final questions. One more for a CEO sitting in your shoes, walking into a rural hospital or a hospital that's struggling. What advice would you give them? They're looking at their ratings, they're looking at the debt, they're looking, and oof, it's heavy. So
It
they're
is.
sitting there and they're like, and they're the leader, or there's a C-suite leader and there's the board and you're sitting there. What advice do you have?
I think it's kind of some back to the, more, I guess I say old adage, but it's not really, it's probably more modern. You don't have to have all the answers. Don't think you have to, because you're not, right? None of us have all the answers. And so I think you have to leverage your team, leverage the people around you. I think as the CEO, there's a certain amount of intimidation, right, that just comes with the title. And you got to try to, at least I think, you've got to try to level set that, right? I have a role. My role in my job description is different than anybody else in the organization. And I guess there is definitely a lot more responsibility, but I have to be seen as a team member in order for me to get the information I can do my job.
Right.
For me, you need to take the time to go into your departments, but go into them not to visit and do a flyby, but go into them to sit down with an actual frontline person and just talk with them, ask them questions about their job. All that information are little nuggets of things that are going to help you in 30 or 40 days, where you can actually start to formulate a plan that actually is going to be able to turn the place around effectively. If you stay too high up, you're going to miss some key things. And sometimes those little things become really big things that actually can be a trajectory to help you drive towards success, versus you stall or not make progress or back up, right? And none of those you want to have. I think being transparent with your board is key. The good, bad, and the ugly, not to tear people apart, but say, these are the issues we have. These are the fundamental things we have to fix. This is where we're at. Honor the reality of where you're at, because if it doesn't look pretty, it doesn't look pretty, right? You can make it pretty. It's just going to be time. but you need to buy yourself that time. If your board feels like that you are starting to build the plan and digging into the nitty gritty, and you have found things that are going to be able to actually bring forth a reward from a financial standpoint or a quality standpoint, or all of them, the majority of boards are going to be okay with that. They know it's not a quick fix. So you need to set realistic expectations on how fast you can make these things work.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I want permission to send people to your LinkedIn
Oh
profile
yeah,
if that's okay. Okay, so they
absolutely.
can connect with you at Wayne Gillis, healthcare leader and market CEO. You'll see right up there. And I just wanted to call out a couple more things underneath your profile. Achieved elimination of old debt of 15 million. Let's see, achieving 94 days cash on hand from 0 days back. It's incredible. In November 2024, reestablished lost $340 billion program that will net $1 million savings. Redefine organizational service lines needed for long-term sustainability. Extensive work with local and state government officials on Medicaid retention strategies, establish hospital budget, first in 2 years with a positive EBITDA, fully implemented house-wide KPIs to drive both operational excellence and quality outcomes as well. I thought those were really good call outs because they are result oriented. And
Yeah,
it's not just to toot your horn, it's just saying, hey, listen, like you've already told your story not only from where Wayne comes from, but also when you are walking into a situation that doesn't even look, how do you turn this around? It is possible. And I think because you've tapped into the missing piece, because you've looked and identified, and I love the whole shoulder to shoulder approach that you've taken. So it's been an honor to have you. I just want to say thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge and to pass it forward. And I hope anybody who does listen to this will be inspired and encouraged. So thank you, Wayne.
absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thank you. And yes, anytime anybody wants to reach out, love to talk with fellow colleagues. So yes, I welcome it.
Every leader has a story, and every story reveals another piece of the bigger picture. What if the missing piece wasn't something you had to find, but something you were meant to become? Subscribe, share, and keep leading with intention. I'm April Reed, and I'll see you in the next conversation on The Missing Piece.